Good evening, dear friends. Margaret here, settling in for another night of stories that arrive in my inbox, each one carrying the weight of secrets that have been held too long. Tonight's letter came from a man named James Crawford, a former Army sergeant who served 3 tours in Afghanistan between 2009 and 2014. He's 52 now, living in Tacoma, Washington, working as a high school history teacher. But what happened to him on a mountain pass outside Kandahar in March 2012 has haunted him for 13 years. James wrote to me because he finally discovered the truth about that night, about the voice that saved his life and the lives of his entire squad. And the truth, he says, is somehow more impossible than any explanation he'd imagined. This is his story, in his own words. Dear Margaret, I'm writing to you because I need someone to know the full truth before I lose my nerve. For 13 years, I've carried this story, shared pieces of it with therapists and fellow veterans, but never the whole thing, never the ending, because the ending changes everything. March 14th, 2012. I was 39 years old, a staff sergeant with the 101st Airborne Division, stationed at Forward Operating Base Wolverine in Kandahar Province, Afghanistan. I'd been in the Army for 18 years by then. I'd seen combat in Iraq, trained soldiers, led men through situations no one should have to face. I was good at my job, calm under pressure, the kind of NCO soldiers trusted to bring them home. That night, my squad, 8 men including myself, was tasked with a routine patrol along Route Silver, a mountain pass that connected 2 villages where we'd been working with local elders. Intelligence said the route was clear, but in Afghanistan, intelligence was always a gamble. The Taliban controlled the high ground in that region, and ambushes were common. My squad that night, Specialist Danny Torres, 23 from San Antonio, Texas, the radio operator. Private First Class Liam Bennett, 19, from Portland, Maine, our youngest. Sergeant First Class Marcus Webb, 41, from Atlanta, my second in command and closest friend in the unit. Corporal James Wu, 26, from San Francisco, our medic. Staff Sergeant Kyle Morrison, 35, from Chicago, weapons specialist. Private Kevin Hayes, 21, from Nashville. Corporal Andre Jackson, 28, from Detroit, and me. 8 men in 2 vehicles, MRAPs, mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicles built like tanks to withstand IEDs. I was in the lead vehicle with Torres, Bennett, and Webb. Morrison, Wu, Jackson, and Hayes followed in the second vehicle. We left the FOB at 2100 hours, 9 p.m. The night was cold, maybe 40 degrees, which felt freezing after the daytime heat. The sky was clear, stars so bright you could read by them. Beautiful, if you could forget where you were and why. Torres was on the radio in the passenger seat, maintaining contact with base. Bennett manned the gun turret, scanning for threats. Webb sat behind me, checking his gear for the 100th time. That's what good soldiers do. Constantly check, double-check, prepare. I drove, my hands steady on the wheel, my eyes on the dark road ahead, illuminated by our headlights. Alpha 6, this is Hawk 2-1. We're approaching checkpoint Bravo. Over, Torres said into the radio. The radio crackled. Hawk 2-1, Alpha 6. Copy that. Route is clear. Proceed to checkpoint Charlie. Over. Roger, Alpha 6. Proceeding to Charlie. Out. The road wound up into the mountains, narrow and treacherous. On our right, a rock wall rose straight up. On our left, a drop-off that went down hundreds of feet into darkness. One wrong move and you'd go over the edge. I'd driven this route a dozen times, but it never got easier. Sergeant Crawford, Bennett called down from the turret. Movement on the ridgeline, 2 o'clock. I looked where he indicated. Could have been anything. Goats, local farmers, Taliban scouts. Keep eyes on it, I said. Morrison, you see that? Morrison's voice came through the vehicle radio from the 2nd MRAP. Got it. Could be nothing. Could be spotters. We continued, alert, but not alarmed. This was normal. Everything in Afghanistan made you tense, but you couldn't react to every shadow or you'd never move at all. We reached checkpoint Charlie, a narrow section where the road curved sharply around the mountain, at 21:47 hours. Torres reported our position to base. Everything was routine, standard patrol. We'd be back at the FOB in 2 hours, write up the reports, get some sleep, do it all again the next night. That's when everything changed. The radio crackled. Not unusual. Radio communications in the mountains were unpredictable. But then a voice came through. Not the clear, standard military communication we were used to. Something different, static-filled, barely audible, but urgent. Hawk 2-1. Stop. Stop now. Torres looked at his radio, confused. Say again, Alpha 6. You're breaking up. Not Alpha 6, the voice said. Clearer now, but still strange. Wrong, somehow. James, stop the vehicle. Right now. Do not proceed. I felt ice run down my spine. The voice knew my name, my first name. No one on the radio used first names. It was always rank and call sign. And the voice itself, I couldn't place it, but it felt familiar in a way that made no sense. Who is this? I demanded, bringing the MRAP to a stop. Behind us, Morrison's vehicle stopped too. No time to explain, the voice said, more urgent now. 50 meters ahead, left side of the road, IED. You need to turn around. Now. Torres was trying to raise base. Alpha 6, this is Hawk 2-1. We're receiving unauthorized communications on this frequency, requesting verification. Over. Static. Then the base radio operator. Hawk 2-1, negative on unauthorized communications. Frequency is secure. What's your status? I looked at Torres, at Webb, both of them staring at me. You heard that voice, right? I asked. Someone telling us to stop? Yeah, Torres said slowly. But base says the frequency is secure. No one else is transmitting. Morrison, I said into the vehicle radio. Did you hear that transmission? Negative, Sergeant Crawford. What transmission? My squad in the lead vehicle had heard it. The second vehicle hadn't. Base hadn't. That was impossible. We were on the same frequency. James, the voice came through again, and this time I was certain. Only our vehicle's radio was receiving it. I know this sounds crazy. I know you don't understand. But there's an IED 50 meters ahead on the left side. A big one. Meant for both vehicles. If you proceed, everyone dies. You have to trust me. Turn around. Now. Who are you? I asked again. A pause. Static. Then, barely audible. Someone who loves you. Someone who can't let this happen. Please, James. Trust me. I'd been in the Army for 18 years. I'd followed orders, trusted my training, relied on intelligence and protocol. Everything in my training said to report this to base, to follow standard procedure, to not make decisions based on unauthorized radio communications from an unidentified source. But something in that voice, the urgency, the fear, the familiarity I couldn't place, made me hesitate. Webb, I said quietly, your opinion. Webb had been in combat as long as I had. He'd survived because he trusted his instincts. He looked at me, his face serious in the dim light. I don't know what that was, Sergeant, but my gut says we should listen. I made a decision that went against every protocol. Torres, tell base we have possible IED ahead. We're turning back to reassess. Sergeant, we don't have confirmation of... Do it, I said. I executed a careful 3-point turn on that narrow road, terrifying in an MRAP, with that drop-off right there, and Morrison did the same behind us. We headed back the way we'd come, away from Checkpoint Charlie, away from whatever might or might not have been waiting 50 meters ahead. Hawk 2-1, Alpha 6, please clarify your IED report. What's your intel source? Torres looked at me. I took the radio. Alpha 6, this is Crawford. Radio communication from unknown source warned of IED at Checkpoint Charlie, requesting EOD team to sweep the area before we proceed. There was a long pause. Then, Roger, Hawk 2-1, return to base. EOD will investigate at first light. We drove back to Fob Wolverine in silence. No one spoke. What was there to say? We'd aborted a mission based on a ghost voice that only 3 of us had heard. The next morning, the explosive ordnance disposal team swept Checkpoint Charlie. They found it at exactly 50 meters past where we'd stopped. A massive IED buried on the left side of the road, packed with enough explosive to destroy both our vehicles and kill everyone in them. It had been professionally made, carefully hidden. Without specific knowledge of its location, we might have driven right over the pressure plate. The EOD chief, a captain named Rodriguez, came to find me. Sergeant Crawford, I need to know. How did you know that IED was there? It was perfectly concealed. Even our detection equipment almost missed it. I didn't have an answer, not one that made sense. After that night, everything changed. My squad was pulled off patrol rotation, pending an investigation into how we'd received intelligence about the IED. The Army takes unauthorized radio communications seriously. especially when they save lives but violate every security protocol. I sat through 3 days of debriefings with my company commander, with intelligence officers, with radio specialists trying to figure out how someone had accessed our secure frequency. Torres, Webb, and Bennett, the three of us who'd heard the voice, gave identical reports. Male voice, American accent, knew my first name, specific details about an IED that was definitely there. Could it have been Taliban? One intelligence officer suggested. Psychological warfare? Trying to confuse you? The Taliban doesn't warn us about their own IEDs, I pointed out, and the voice was American, native English speaker. Could it have been someone from another unit on a similar frequency? The radio specialists ruled that out. Our encryption was solid. No other unit was operating in that area. There was no explanation for how someone accessed our radio. Could you have imagined it? A psychologist asked gently. Combat stress, pattern recognition, your subconscious picking up on danger cues? 3 of us heard the same thing, I said. Same words, same voice. That's not imagination. But they had no better explanation. The official report classified it as unidentified radio communication, possibly equipment malfunction that coincided with legitimate intelligence. In other words, they didn't know what happened, so they filed it under weird shit that happens in combat zones and moved on. I couldn't move on. That voice haunted me. The familiarity of it, the way it had said my name, not like a stranger, but like someone who knew me, and the words, someone who loves you, someone who can't let this happen. I started making lists. Who in my life would say something like that? Who had a voice that might sound familiar even through radio static? My father had died in 2003. My mother was 70, living in a nursing home in Tacoma, her mind ravaged by dementia. I had a sister, Patricia, living in Denver with her husband and 2 kids, but I'd spoken to her on the phone the week before, and that voice wasn't hers. I had an ex-wife, Claire, from a marriage that ended badly in 2006, but why would she have access to military radio frequencies in Afghanistan? None of it made sense. Marcus Webb, my second in command, pulled me aside one night in the Phoebe mess hall. You're obsessing over this, he said. You need to let it go. How? I asked. Marcus, someone saved our lives. 8 men are alive because that voice warned us. Don't you want to know who it was? Of course I do. But we're not going to figure it out. The Army's investigation turned up nothing. Maybe it's one of those mysteries that never gets solved. Maybe we just say thank you to the universe and move on. Do you believe that? I asked. That it was just random chance? Equipment malfunction? He was quiet for a long moment. No, he finally said. I heard that voice, James. I heard the fear in it, the urgency. That was someone who knew exactly what was about to happen and was desperate to stop it. But I don't have an explanation, and driving myself crazy trying to find one isn't going to help anyone. He was right, but I couldn't stop. Every night, lying in my bunk, I'd replay that voice in my head, the tone, the cadence, the way it said my name. Familiar, but I couldn't place it. I finished my tour in Afghanistan 3 months later, came home to Tacoma in June 2012. The transition from combat to civilian life is always hard, but this was worse. I'd left a piece of myself in that mountain pass, a question without an answer. I started seeing a therapist, VA provided, a nice woman named Dr. Reeves who specialized in PTSD. I told her about the voice. It's not uncommon for soldiers to experience auditory phenomena in combat situations, she said. The brain under stress can create very vivid auditory hallucinations, especially when there's real danger present. Your subconscious might have picked up on environmental cues, disturbed earth, unusual shadows, something that registered as wrong even if you weren't consciously aware of it, and it manifested as a warning voice. 3 of us heard it, I said again. The exact same thing. Shared experiences can create shared perceptions, especially in high-stress situations where everyone's hypervigilant. It's possible you heard something, even equipment noise, and your brains interpreted it as a voice, filling in details based on shared expectations. It was a reasonable explanation, logical, scientific, but it felt wrong. I spent the next year trying to reintegrate into civilian life. I took a job at a high school in Tacoma, teaching history and coaching junior varsity football. I started dating again. A teacher named Amanda who was patient with my nightmares and my difficulty adjusting. I tried to build a normal life, but I never stopped thinking about that voice. In 2014, I attended a memorial service for a soldier from our unit who died in Afghanistan after I'd left, not from combat, but from an accident during training. At the service, I reconnected with some of the men from my squad: Torres, Webb, Morrison, Wu. We shared stories, memories, the dark humor that combat veterans use to process trauma. "You ever figure out who that voice was?" Torres asked me. "The one from Checkpoint Charlie?" "No," I said. "You." He shook his head. "I've thought about it a lot, though. That voice saved my life. I got married last year. My wife, she's pregnant now. I'm going to be a dad because someone warned us about that IED, and I don't even know who to thank." We stood there, 8 men who should have died in March 2012, alive because of a voice no one could explain. "Maybe we're not supposed to know," Wu said quietly. "Maybe some things are just beyond explanation, and we accept that and be grateful." I wanted to accept that. I tried, but the question kept gnawing at me. Who loved me enough to save my life from thousands of miles away? Who had that kind of knowledge, that kind of access, that kind of desperation in their voice? The answer, when it finally came years later, was more impossible than anything I could have imagined. 10 years passed. March 2022. I was 49 years old, still teaching, still living in Tacoma. Amanda and I had gotten married in 2016. Life was good, stable, peaceful, normal. The nightmares had faded. The hypervigilance had eased. I'd learned to live with the unanswered questions about that night in Afghanistan. Then I received a letter. Not an email, an actual physical letter, forwarded to me from the VA because it had been sent to my old military address. The envelope was postmarked from a hospice facility in Portland, Oregon. Inside was a handwritten letter on notebook paper, the writing shaky and difficult to read. "Dear James Crawford," it began. "You don't know me, but I need to tell you something before I die. My name is Evelyn Torres. I'm Danny Torres's grandmother. Danny told me about you, about the voice on the radio that saved your squad in Afghanistan. I need you to know the truth about that voice, because if I don't tell someone, the truth will die with me, and you deserve to know." My heart started pounding. Danny Torres, Specialist Torres, my radio operator. I'd lost touch with him after 2014. The last I'd heard, he was living in Texas with his wife and kids, doing well. The letter continued. "In March 2012, I was living in San Diego, taking care of my husband Richard, who was dying of cancer. Danny was overseas, and I was so worried about him every day. I prayed for him constantly. On the night of March 14th, Richard passed away at 11:47 p.m. I was holding his hand when he died. What happened next? I can't explain. I don't expect you to believe it. I barely believe it myself, and I was there. About 10 minutes after Richard died, while I was still sitting with his body waiting for the hospice nurse to come, the old ham radio in Richard's study turned on by itself. Richard had been an amateur radio operator his whole life. He had all this equipment, and even when he got too sick to use it, he kept it in the study. It was his hobby, his passion. The radio turned on. The dials lit up. I could hear static. And then Richard's voice came through the speaker. Not recorded. Live. Speaking. I recognized my husband's voice immediately, even through the static. He said, "Evie, listen to me. I don't have much time. Danny's in danger. His squad, they're about to drive into an ambush. IED on the road. I need you to trust me. I need you to get this information to them. Now." I was terrified, frozen. My husband had just died, and now his voice was coming through the radio, telling me Danny was in danger. I thought I was losing my mind. But Richard kept talking. He gave me specific details, the unit designation, the route number, the exact location of the IED. He told me I had to contact the military immediately, but I knew they'd never believe me. A grieving widow calling to report information she got from her dead husband's ghost? Then Richard said something that changed everything. "There's another way, the radio frequencies. I can access them. I can warn them directly. But Evie, I need you to trust me. I need you to believe this is real, because once I do this, I won't be able to come back. This is goodbye. But I can't let Danny die. I can't let any of them die. Not when I can stop it." I asked him how he knew, how he could possibly know what was happening in Afghanistan. He said, "I don't know how to explain it. Where I am now, time is different. I can see things, know things. I saw Danny's death. I saw all of them dying, and I can't let that happen. Tell him I love him. Tell him Grandpa saved him. And tell him to name his son after me when the time comes. Then the radio went dead. Completely dead. Not just off, but dead. When I tried to turn it on later, it wouldn't work. The circuits were burned out. The equipment ruined. It never worked again. I had to stop reading. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the paper. Richard Torres, Danny's grandfather, a ham radio operator. He'd died the same night we'd heard the voice. The letter continued. I never told anyone except Danny. I called him a few weeks later after he came home and told him what happened. He didn't believe me at first. He thought grief had made me confused. But I had details, specific details about that night, about the IED, about the mission, that I couldn't have known unless Richard really did contact them. Danny kept it quiet because he knew no one would believe it. A dead grandfather using a ham radio to contact a military squad in Afghanistan and warn them about an IED. It sounds insane. I know it sounds insane. But James, it happened. I was there. I heard Richard's voice. I watched that radio turn on by itself and burn itself out trying to save my grandson's life. I'm writing to you now because I'm dying. Pancreatic cancer. I have maybe a week left, and before I die, I need someone besides Danny to know the truth. Richard loved that boy more than anything. And when he got the chance, whatever chance, however impossible, to save Danny's life, he took it. Even if it meant using up whatever energy, whatever connection, whatever last piece of himself he had left. The voice you heard that night, that was Richard Torres, Danny's grandfather, my husband, a man who loved so deeply that not even death could stop him from protecting his grandson. I don't expect you to believe this. I don't expect anyone to believe it. But you asked Danny once who the voice was. Now you know. And if you can, if it's possible, tell the other men who were there. Tell them they're alive because a grandfather loved his grandson enough to break every rule of life and death to save him. Thank you for bringing Danny home. Thank you for listening to Richard's warning, even though it made no sense. You saved 8 lives that night by trusting the impossible. With gratitude and peace, I sat in my living room holding that letter and cried. Amanda found me there an hour later, still holding the pages, unable to speak. James? What is it? What happened? I handed her the letter. Let her read it. When she finished, she looked at me with confusion and concern. You can't possibly believe this. I don't know what I believe, I said, but I need to find Danny Torres. I need to hear this from him directly. It took me 2 days to track down Danny Torres. He was living in Austin, Texas, working as an IT specialist for a tech company. He was 43 now, married with 3 kids. When I called him and explained who I was, there was a long silence. Sergeant Crawford, he finally said. I wondered if you'd ever reach out about this. Your grandmother's letter, I said. Danny, I need to know, is it true? Any of it? Another long pause. Can we do this in person? I'm not comfortable talking about this on the phone. Can you come to Austin? I flew out the next week. Amanda thought I was crazy, obsessing over something that couldn't possibly be real, but I had to know. Danny met me at a coffee shop in downtown Austin. He'd aged well. Married life and fatherhood suited him. But when he looked at me, I saw the same haunted expression I probably wore when I thought about that night. We sat outside on the patio, coffee cooling in front of us, and Danny told me everything. My grandfather died on March 14, 2012, at 11:47 p.m. Pacific Time, he began. That's 8:17 a.m. on March 15th in Afghanistan, about 45 minutes before we reached Checkpoint Charlie. I did the math in my head. The timing worked. My grandmother called me about 3 weeks after I got back from that tour. She told me about the radio, about Grandpa's voice, about everything she wrote in that letter to you. At first, I thought she was having a breakdown. Grief does strange things to people. I thought maybe she'd fallen asleep, had a vivid dream, and in her grief believed it was real. But, I prompted, but she had details, specific details about the mission that night that I'd never told her. The route number, the checkpoint names, the fact that there were 2 vehicles. She even knew about the rock wall on one side and the drop-off on the other, described the road perfectly. I'd never told her any of that. How could she know? She could have gotten those details from you later, I suggested, playing devil's advocate. After the fact, you tell her about the mission, and her mind incorporates those details into the memory of the dream. That's what I thought too, Danny said, until I found the ham radio. He pulled out his phone, scrolled through photos, and showed me a picture. It was an old radio setup, the kind of equipment amateur radio operators use. The equipment was heavily damaged, circuits visibly burned out. This was my grandfather's radio. I went through his stuff after he died, found this in his study. My grandmother was right. It was destroyed, but not normally destroyed. The circuits are burned out in a pattern that an electrician friend said was consistent with a massive power surge, like the equipment tried to transmit at a frequency and power level it was never designed for, and it burned itself out in the process. My coffee sat forgotten. When was it damaged? According to my grandmother, the night he died. She heard him speak through it, then it died, and never worked again. James, I took that radio to 3 different amateur radio experts. They all said the same thing. The equipment experienced a catastrophic power surge that shouldn't have been possible with its power source. It's like something pushed massive amounts of energy through it all at once. That doesn't prove— I know, Danny interrupted. I know it doesn't prove anything supernatural. Could be a coincidence. Could be equipment failure that happened to occur the same night my grandfather died. But here's the thing that I can't explain away. My grandmother's recording. Recording? Danny took a breath. My grandfather kept a digital recorder connected to his ham radio. He liked to record his conversations with other radio operators. After he died, my grandmother found a recording from that night, the last recording the equipment made before it died. She sent me a copy. Do you want to hear it? My heart was pounding. Yes. Danny pulled out earbuds, connected them to his phone, and handed one to me. This is going to be hard to listen to. Just be prepared. He pressed play. At first, just static. Then a voice, male, older, speaking with urgency. Evie, listen to me. I don't have much time. Danny's in danger. I listened to the entire recording. Richard Torres's voice explaining the situation to his wife. His explanation that he could access the military radio frequencies. His goodbye. And then, at the very end, something else. A transmission. Radio static, and then, Hawk 2-1. Stop. Stop now. It was the voice. The exact voice I'd heard that night on the radio in Afghanistan. I'd know it anywhere. I'd been hearing it in my head for 10 years. That's him, I whispered. That's the voice that warned us. Danny nodded, tears in his eyes. My grandfather's voice. Saved my life from the other side of death. We sat there in that Austin coffee shop, 2 combat veterans trying to process the impossible. Finally, I spoke. How do we explain this? What's the rational explanation? I've spent 10 years trying to find one, Danny said. Shared delusion, equipment malfunction, coincidence, my grandmother's grief creating false memories. But James, I've listened to that recording hundreds of times. I've had it analyzed. It's real. The voice is real. And it matches the voice you, Webb, and Bennett heard that night. How do you explain that? I can't, I admitted. But Danny, if we tell people this, if we say a dead man saved our squad using a ham radio, they'll think we've lost our minds. I know. That's why I've never told anyone except my wife. That's why my grandmother waited until she was dying to write to you. Because who would believe it? He looked at me intently. But you asked. You needed to know. So now you know. And you can decide what to do with this information. Did your grandfather have military experience? I asked. How did he know the proper radio protocols, the call signs? He was Navy, served in Vietnam. Radio operator, actually. Spent his whole life working with communications equipment. If anyone could figure out how to access a military frequency, even from wherever he was, it would be him. That detail made it somehow more believable and more impossible at the same time. You said your grandmother asked you to name your son after him, I said, remembering the letter. Danny smiled. My middle son, Richard Daniel Torres. We call him Richie. He's 8 now, and every time I look at him, I think about how he wouldn't exist if my grandfather hadn't warned us that night. My whole family, my wife, my 3 kids, the life I have, none of it would exist if we'd driven over that IED. Does Richie know? Not yet. How do you explain to an 8-year-old that he's named after a grandfather who saved his dad's life from beyond the grave? But someday, when he's older, I'll tell him. I'll tell him that love is stronger than death and that his great-grandfather proved it. I flew back to Tacoma with Danny's grandmother's letter, the recording on my phone, and a truth I didn't know what to do with. Amanda listened to everything. The letter, the recording, Danny's story. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. What do you want me to say? She finally asked. I want you to tell me I'm not crazy. that this is real. She took my hand. James, I believe that you heard a voice that night. I believe Danny's grandmother had an experience she couldn't explain. I believe all of you are trying to make sense of something that saved your lives. But whether it was actually a dead man using a ham radio to contact you from the afterlife, I don't know. I don't know if I can believe that. The recording, I said. You heard the recording. That's the same voice. I heard a recording of an old man speaking and then some radio static. Could it be the same voice you heard? Maybe. Could there be another explanation? Also maybe. The human mind is incredible at pattern recognition, at finding meaning and connection even where none exists. She was right, of course. Every rational part of my brain agreed with her, but I'd been there that night. I'd heard the fear and urgency in that voice. I'd felt the certainty that someone who loved me was desperate to save my life. Over the next few months, I reached out to the other men from my squad. Marcus Webb, living in Atlanta, working as a police officer. Kyle Morrison, in Chicago, a firefighter now. James Wu, still in the Army, training combat medics. Andre Jackson, in Detroit, working construction. Kevin Hayes in Nashville, playing guitar in bars and writing songs. One by one, I told them the story, sent them the recording, watched them struggle with the same impossible truth I'd been wrestling with. Webb's response was the most pragmatic. I don't care if it was a ghost, an angel, aliens, or a time traveler. Someone saved our lives. We're all here, alive, because we listened to that voice. That's what matters. Morrison was more skeptical. It's a hell of a story, Crawford, and I want to believe it. But coincidence is a powerful thing. Maybe the timing, the voice, all of it. Maybe it's just our brains trying to make sense of random events. Wu, deeply religious, had a different take. I've always believed in miracles. This is a miracle. A man loved his grandson so much that God gave him one more chance to save him. That's grace. That's love. I don't need a scientific explanation. Hayes wrote me an email that said simply, "That voice saved my life. I met my wife 2 years after I got back from Afghanistan. We have a daughter now. She's 5. Her name is Grace, because that's what we received that night. Grace. I don't care how or why. I'm just grateful." Jackson's response broke me. He called me at 2 a.m., drunk, crying. "I tried to kill myself last year," he told me. PTSD, depression, all of it. I had the gun in my hand, and I heard that voice in my head. Not literally, but the memory of it. Stop. Stop now. And I did. I stopped. I got help. I'm 6 months sober now. That voice saved me twice, Crawford. Once in Afghanistan, and once in my living room in Detroit. 8 men, alive because of a voice on the radio. 8 men with wives, children, careers, futures. How many lives had been affected by that warning? Danny's 3 kids, Hayes' daughter Grace, the people Webb arrested as a cop who might have died if there had been a different officer there, the patients Wu trained medics to save, the fires Morrison put out, the buildings Jackson constructed. One moment, one warning, one impossible voice, and the ripples spread outward, affecting dozens, hundreds, maybe thousands of lives. In 2023, we held a reunion, all 8 of us meeting in Tacoma for a weekend. Some of us had stayed in touch over the years, but others hadn't seen each other since Afghanistan. We'd all aged, put on weight or lost hair, carried the marks of 13 years of living. On Saturday night, we gathered at my house. Amanda cooked a huge meal. The guys brought their families, wives, kids, parents. My living room was full of noise and life and laughter. After dinner, after the families had gone to bed or back to hotels, the 8 of us sat on my back deck with beers and stories, and I played them the recording. The full recording, including Richard Torres's voice warning his wife, explaining what he was about to do, saying goodbye. When it finished, there was silence. Morrison was crying. Webb had his head in his hands. Wu was praying quietly. Hayes just stared at nothing. Torres, Danny had flown in from Austin, looked at each of us. "My grandfather did that," he said quietly. "For me, for all of us, and I never got to thank him, never got to tell him I love him. He was already gone. He knew," Wu said firmly. "Danny, he knew. That's why he did it. Because he loved you. Because that's what love does. It protects. It saves, even when it's impossible." We talked until dawn. 8 men trying to make peace with a truth that defied explanation. By the time the sun came up, We'd reached a consensus. We didn't all agree on what had happened. Ghost, miracle, coincidence, something else. But we agreed on what mattered. We were alive. We had been given a gift, however impossible. And we needed to honor that gift by living well, by being good men, by making our lives count. To Richard Torres, Webb said, raising his beer bottle. A man who loved his grandson enough to break every law of physics and reality to save him. To Richard Torres, we echoed, 8 voices together. Margaret, I'm writing to you now because Evelyn Torres died 3 years ago, taking with her the first-hand account of what happened that night. Danny has the recording, but he's hesitant to share it widely. He's afraid people will think he's crazy, or worse, that they'll dismiss his grandfather's sacrifice as delusion or hoax. But I'm 62 now. I've been teaching for nearly 20 years. I've watched students grow up, go to college, start careers, build lives, and I think about how none of them would have had Mr. Crawford as their history teacher if I'd driven over that IED in March 2012. How many lives have I touched? How many students have I influenced, inspired, challenged, and multiply that by 8. 8 men who survived, 8 families that exist, because a voice warned us to stop. I've spent 13 years trying to find a rational explanation, trying to make sense of the impossible. And here's what I've concluded. Maybe the explanation doesn't matter. Maybe whether it was Richard Torres's ghost, a hallucination, divine intervention, or something science hasn't discovered yet, maybe that's not the point. The point is that we listened. When every protocol, every training, every logical thought said to ignore the unauthorized transmission and proceed with the mission, we listened. We trusted something we didn't understand, and that trust saved 8 lives. I teach teenagers, Margaret. They ask me about my time in the army, about combat, about what it was like, and I tell them stories, safe stories, sanitized stories. But sometimes, with students I trust, I tell them about the voice. I tell them that on a mountain pass in Afghanistan, something impossible happened. I tell them that sometimes you have to trust things you can't explain. I tell them that love is more powerful than logic, more enduring than death, more real than anything we can measure or prove. Some students look at me like I'm crazy. Others nod, understanding something I can't quite articulate. But they all listen. And maybe, someday, one of them will face their own impossible moment and remember, trust. Listen, sometimes the universe is trying to save you. Danny's son, Richie, is 11 now. Danny told him the story last year, about his great-grandfather Richard, about the ham radio, about the voice that saved his dad's squad. Richie asked if he could hear the recording. Danny played it for him. When it finished, Richie said, "So great-grandpa loved Daddy so much that he found a way to save him even after he died." "Yes," Danny said. "That's the coolest thing ever," Richie declared. "I'm going to be like great-grandpa when I grow up. I'm going to learn about radios and save people." He's taking electronics classes now, studying communication technology. His school science fair project this year was about radio frequency transmission. And Danny sees his father in his son. That same intensity, that same passion for connecting people across distances. Legacy. That's what this is. Richard Torres died on March 14, 2012, but his love saved 8 men. Those 8 men are living lives, raising children, affecting communities. And Richie Torres is learning to communicate across distances, inspired by a great-grandfather he never met who proved that love transcends every boundary. Marcus Webb's daughter became a doctor. She's working in an emergency room in Atlanta, saving lives. Webb tells me she's brilliant, compassionate, fierce, everything you'd want in an ER doctor. Would she exist if we'd driven over that IED? No. How many lives will she save in her career? Kyle Morrison's son is a firefighter, following in his father's footsteps. He's 24, already decorated for bravery. Morrison sent me a photo of them together in their uniforms, 3 generations of Morrison men serving their communities. Would that son exist without the warning that night? I could go on. Hayes' daughter Grace, who wants to be a teacher. Wu's twin boys, both in ROTC, planning military careers. Jackson's daughter, studying engineering at Michigan. Torres's 3 kids, Richie the electronics enthusiast, Sophia the artist, Marcus the athlete. 15 children, 15 futures that wouldn't exist if 8 men had died on a mountain pass in Afghanistan. Amanda and I never had kids. We were both older when we married, and it just didn't happen. But sometimes I think about how I've been given something else, the gift of witnessing all these other lives, these children, these families, these ripples spreading outward from one impossible moment. I still don't have a scientific explanation for what happened that night. I've read books on quantum physics, on consciousness, on the nature of time. I've talked to physicists, to theologians, to philosophers. No one has a definitive answer, but I've stopped needing one, because I've seen the evidence. Not evidence that can be measured in a lab, but evidence that matters. Lives lived, love shared, families built, futures created. Richard Torres, whether through divine intervention, quantum entanglement, the power of love, or some mechanism we don't yet understand, saved 8 men. He used his final energy, his last connection to the physical world, to warn us, and in doing so, he created ripples that are still spreading outward 13 years later. That's the truth I'm sharing with you now, Margaret. Not to convince anyone of the supernatural, not to prove life after death, not to challenge anyone's beliefs, but to say this: sometimes impossible things happen. Sometimes love finds a way. Sometimes we need to trust voices we don't understand. And most importantly, when someone saves your life, you honor that gift by living well. I'm 62 years old. I've lived 23 years longer than I should have. Every day since March 14th, 2012 has been borrowed time, and I've tried to make those days count, to be a good teacher, a good husband, a good man, to honor Richard Torres's sacrifice by living a life worthy of being saved. All 8 of us are trying to do the same. We're not perfect. We struggle with PTSD, with survivor's guilt, with the ordinary challenges of being human, but we're here, we're alive, we're grateful. Thank you for reading this, Margaret. Thank you for giving me space to share the full truth of what happened that night. I don't expect everyone to believe it. I barely believe it myself on some days, but it's my truth. It's our truth. 8 men who lived because a voice warned us to stop. And if Richard Torres, wherever he is now, can somehow know that I'm telling this story, I want him to hear this. Thank you. Thank you for loving your grandson enough to save him. Thank you for saving all of us. Thank you for showing me that love really is stronger than death. Your sacrifice ripples forward into the future, touching lives you'll never see, but I see them. We all see them, and we're grateful. With profound respect and eternal gratitude, James Crawford, former Staff Sergeant, 101st Airborne Division, now just a high school history teacher trying to make each day count. Margaret sets down the final pages slowly, her eyes bright with unshed tears. She sits in silence for a long moment before speaking. That was James Crawford's story, she finally says, her voice soft. The man who heard a voice that shouldn't have existed. The soldier who lived because he trusted the impossible. I don't know what to make of this, friends. I truly don't. Part of me wants the rational explanation. Coincidence, equipment malfunction, shared delusion born of combat stress. Part of me wants to believe in the miraculous, that a grandfather's love was so strong it transcended death itself. But maybe both can be true. Maybe the universe is more complex than our either-or thinking allows. Maybe love and logic aren't opposites, but different aspects of the same profound truth, that we are connected to each other in ways we barely understand. What I know for certain is this: 8 men are alive today. 15 children exist. Countless lives have been touched, students taught, fires extinguished, patients saved, buildings built, all because on one night in Afghanistan, someone listened to a voice they couldn't explain. To James Crawford and the 7 men who served with him, thank you for your service and your story. To Richard Torres, who loved his grandson so fiercely that death itself couldn't stop him, your legacy lives on in ways you never imagined. And to all of you listening tonight, when you hear that voice in your head, that intuition, that unexplainable knowing, listen, trust it. Sometimes the universe is trying to save you. Sometimes love finds a way. Good night, dear friends. Hold your loved ones close. And remember, we're all connected in ways that defy explanation. That's not supernatural. That's just being human. Until next time.